He was just a quiet single dad working the overnight maintenance shift at a private airfield, invisible to everyone who walked past him with their designer luggage and million-dollar deals. Nobody knew about his past. Nobody expected what he'd do next. But when 8 armed men stormed onto a billionaire CEO's jet at 38,000 feet and his young one whispered through the radio, "Dad, is the lady going to be okay?" everything changed. What happened in that pressurized cabin would expose a betrayal that reached the highest levels of corporate power, uncover skills that were supposed to stay buried, and awaken something neither of them saw coming. This isn't just a hijacking story. It's about courage in confined spaces, trust when there's nowhere to run, and the quiet power of a man who walked away from war but couldn't walk away when someone needed saving. Sometimes the most dangerous person on the plane is the one nobody's watching. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The night air at Silver Point Executive Terminal smelled like jet fuel and rain. A thin mist rolled across the tarmac, softening the harsh glow of the runway lights that stretched into the darkness like a path to nowhere. It was 11:47 p.m., and most of the world was asleep. But not Brian Tate. He stood beneath the wing of a Gulfstream G650, wrench in hand, double-checking the hydraulic pressure on the landing gear. His gray maintenance uniform hung loose on his frame, sleeves stained with grease, name patch faded from too many washes. At 41, he looked older than he was, the kind of older that came not from years, but from things seen and carried. Brian worked the graveyard shift because it paid more and because it kept him out of sight. He preferred it that way. No small talk with pilots who looked through him. No awkward encounters with passengers who treated him like furniture. Just the hum of engines, the click of tools, and the quiet satisfaction of making sure everything worked the way it should. Behind him, a small voice broke through the silence. "Dad, can I have the flashlight? Mine's dead." He turned to see his daughter, 8-year-old Sophie, sitting cross-legged on an overturned tool cart, her homework spread across a clipboard. She wore a puffy pink jacket over her school uniform, hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails she'd insisted on doing herself that morning. Brian pulled the spare flashlight from his belt and handed it over. "You're supposed to be doing math, not drawing helicopters in the margins." Sophie grinned, dimples flashing. "It's a plane, not a helicopter. And it's for science class. We're learning about air pressure." "Sure you are." She swung her legs and glanced toward the terminal. "Is that the fancy CEO lady's plane?" Brian followed her gaze. Through the rain-streaked windows of the private lounge, he could see her. Zoe Lewis, founder and CEO of Arcadia Tech, a company worth north of $8 billion. She sat alone at a table near the window, bathed in soft light, fingers flying across a laptop keyboard. Even from a distance, she looked exhausted. "Yeah," Brian said quietly. "That's her plane. Why's she flying so late? Probably has a meeting somewhere important." Sophie tilted her head. She looked sad. Brian paused, rag in hand, and looked again. Sophie was right. Zoe Lewis wasn't just tired. There was something heavier in the way she sat, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, like someone holding up a building and pretending it didn't hurt. "Sometimes people who have a lot are also carrying a lot," he said. Sophie nodded solemnly, as if she understood something most adults didn't. Then she went back to her drawing. Brian returned to his work, tightening bolts and running diagnostics. He'd been doing this job for 2 years. Before that, he'd been a diesel mechanic in Crescent Bay. And, before that was a life he didn't talk about anymore. He'd been a combat engineer in the Navy. 14 years of building bridges, clearing bombs, and keeping people alive in places that didn't want them there. He'd been good at it. Too good. And when his wife died in a car accident while he was overseas, he'd walked away from all of it. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just separation papers and a daughter who needed him more than the military did. Now, he fixed planes in the dark and made sure Sophie never had to wonder where he was. Inside the terminal, Zoe Lewis closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. The leather chair across from her was empty, just like it had been for the last 6 months. No assistant, no security detail. Not tonight. She'd insisted on traveling light for this trip. It was supposed to be low profile. A quick flight to Denver for a board meeting. Then back by morning. But the board meeting wasn't the problem. The problem was the encrypted file sitting in her inbox. The one her head of security had flagged 3 hours ago. The one that showed unusual financial transfers tied to someone she trusted. Someone close. She wasn't sure who to trust anymore. A voice crackled over the terminal speaker. "Miss Lewis, your flight crew is ready for departure. We'll have you wheels up in 15 minutes. She stood, smoothing the front of her charcoal blazer, and walked toward the tarmac entrance. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. She pulled her coat tighter and moved toward the jet. That's when she saw him, the maintenance worker beneath the wing, his back to her, moving with quiet precision. He didn't rush, didn't fumble, just worked with the kind of calm that came from someone who'd done something 1,000 times and still respected it. And sitting nearby, a young girl with a flashlight and a clipboard, completely unbothered by the cold or the late hour. Zoe slowed her pace. For some reason, the sight of them made her chest tighten. Not with sadness, but with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Envy, maybe. Or longing. The simplicity of a father and daughter just existing together without the weight of empires or enemies. Brian glanced up as she approached. Their eyes met for a brief second. He didn't smile, didn't bow, just gave a single nod of acknowledgement. The kind that said, "I see you, but I'm not impressed or intimidated." It startled her. Most people either fawned or feared. He did neither. "Evening," he said simply, then returned to his checklist. "Evening," she replied, though he wasn't looking anymore. She climbed the stairs into the jet. The interior was all cream leather, polished wood, and soft lighting. Her sanctuary, her prison. She sat in her usual seat by the window and buckled in. The co-pilot poked his head out from the cockpit. "We're all set, Miss Lewis. Flight time to Denver is 2 hours and 40 minutes. Weather's clear most of the way. Thank you, Captain Reed." He disappeared back into the cockpit. The engines began their low, rumbling startup sequence. Outside, Brian finished his checks and stepped back from the aircraft. He waved to the ground crew, signaling clearance. Then he walked over to Sophie and helped her pack up her things. "Time to head to the break room, kiddo. Plane's about to taxi." Sophie looked up at the jet, then at her father. "Dad?" "Yeah? Do you think she's going to be okay?" "The sad lady?" Brian frowned. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. She just looked like she needed someone." He didn't answer right away. Then he ruffled her hair gently. "She's got a whole crew up there. She'll be fine." But as the Gulf Stream began to roll forward, engines building to a whine, something in Brian's gut tightened. Not intuition, not paranoia, just the faint, familiar hum of a feeling he used to get in the field, the one that whispered, "Pay attention." He watched the jet taxi toward the runway, lights blinking in the mist. Sophie stood beside him, quiet now, her small hand slipping into his. And neither of them knew that in less than 30 minutes, everything was about to go very, very wrong. The Gulfstream G650 climbed smoothly through the night sky, leaving Silver Point far below. The city lights faded into scattered constellations, then disappeared entirely beneath a blanket of clouds. Inside the cabin, the only sounds were the steady hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of papers. Zoe Lewis sat with her tablet in her lap, scrolling through financial reports she'd read 3 times already. The numbers didn't change. The problem didn't go away. She sighed and set the device aside, staring instead at the dark window beside her. At 38,000 feet, the world felt distant. Problems felt smaller, or at least, they were supposed to. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Just breathe. That's what her therapist had told her. When everything feels like it's spinning out of control, focus on what you can control. Your breath, your body, your next choice. But how do you control anything when you don't know who's betrayed you? A soft chime sounded from the cockpit intercom. Captain Reed's voice followed, calm and professional. Miss Lewis, we've reached cruising altitude. Feel free to move about the cabin. Flight attendant will be back shortly with your usual. Thank you, Captain. Zoe unbuckled and stood, stretching her legs. The cabin was spacious, configured more like a living room than an aircraft. Leather recliners, a small conference table, a bar area stocked with water, coffee, and whiskey she never touched. She poured herself a glass of sparkling water and returned to her seat. As she sat down, the cabin door behind her opened. The flight attendant stepped in, a woman in her mid-30s, with neat blonde hair and a practiced smile. But something was off. Her uniform was correct. Her badge was in place, but her eyes didn't match the smile. They were sharp, alert, scanning, preparing, and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Miss Lewis, can I get you anything else? No, thank you. I'm fine. The woman nodded and retreated toward the galley area. But she didn't go all the way back. She stopped near the rear lavatory and stood still. Too still. Zoe frowned. She'd flown with this crew a dozen times. She didn't recognize this attendant. Before she could say anything, the cockpit door opened again. But this time, it wasn't the captain. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a pilot's uniform. But wrong. The fit was off. The shoes were black sneakers, not regulation Oxfords, and his eyes scanned the cabin the way a predator scans a room. Zoe's stomach dropped. "Who are you?" she said, voice steady despite the ice crawling up her spine. The man didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the galley and nodded once. The rear cabin door, the one that led to the baggage area, opened. 4 men stepped through, then 2 more from the lavatory, then another from the cockpit. 8 in total, all armed. Zoe's breath caught. She didn't scream, didn't move, just sat frozen as the reality crashed over her like cold water. The lead man, the one in the pilot uniform, stepped forward. He wasn't holding a weapon yet, didn't need to. His presence was enough. "Miss Lewis," he said, voice smooth and unnervingly polite. "Please remain seated and calm. No one needs to get hurt tonight." Her mind raced. Where was Captain Reed? Where was the co-pilot? Were they alive? As if reading her thoughts, the man gestured toward the cockpit. "Your crew is secured and unharmed. They'll stay that way as long as you cooperate." Zoe's fists clenched in her lap. "What do you want?" "Right now, your silence. Soon, access codes to your Arcadia vault." Her blood went cold. The Arcadia vault was a digital fortress containing proprietary AI algorithms, client data, and financial instruments worth billions. If someone accessed it, they could destabilize entire markets. "I don't have those codes with me," she lied. The man smiled. Not warmly. "We both know that's not true. You carry biometric access on your wrist device. The same one you're wearing right now." Zoe glanced down at the sleek silver bracelet on her left wrist. It looked like jewelry, but beneath the surface was a fingerprint scanner, retinal sync chip, and encrypted access key. "You've been planning this," she said quietly, "for 6 months." Her mind spun. 6 months. That was when the board had pushed through the merger vote, when Victor Harlan, her oldest investor, had suddenly gone quiet, when internal audits started showing gaps she couldn't explain. "Harlan sent you," she said. The man's smile widened. "Mr. Harlan prefers to remain anonymous. But let's just say he's tired of being a silent partner." One of the other men moved closer, standing behind Zoe's seat. She could feel his presence like a shadow. "We're going to take a little detour," the lead man continued. "Instead of Denver, we'll be landing at a private airstrip in Nevada. Once we're on the ground, you'll transfer access. Clean. Simple. No one gets hurt. And if I refuse?" He leaned in slightly. "Then we make it complicated." Back at Silver Point Terminal, Brian was wiping down his workbench when the radio on his belt crackled to life. "Tate, you copy?" He unclipped it. "Yeah. Go ahead." It was Davis, one of the tower operators. His voice sounded strained. "We've got a weird situation. That Gulfstream that just took off, tail number November 73 Whiskey Zulu, it's not responding to course corrections." Brian frowned. "What do you mean?" "They filed for Denver, but they just turned southwest, and when we hailed them, the captain's voice sounded off. Clipped. Like someone was feeding him lines." Brian's pulse quickened. "You think it's a hijacking?" "We're not sure. FAA's been notified, but they're saying it could just be a comm malfunction." "I don't buy it." Neither did Brian. He looked across the hangar. Sophie was asleep on a bench, her jacket draped over her like a blanket. "Davis, can you pull up the passenger manifest for that flight?" A pause. "Just one passenger. Zoe Lewis, CEO of Arcadia Tech." The sad lady, Sophie had called her. Brian's jaw tightened. Who else was on board? Crew? 2 pilots. 1 attendant. Standard configuration. And maintenance logs? Hold on. Keyboard clicks. "Last maintenance was you, Tate. Signed off at 23:52. Brian's mind worked fast. He'd been under that plane for 40 minutes. He knew every panel, every hatch, every system. And he knew something else. That Gulfstream had a secondary access hatch in the cargo hold. A maintenance entry point that could be opened from the inside if you knew where to look. "Davis," Brian said slowly, "how long before that plane is out of our airspace?" "Maybe 20 minutes. Why?" Brian looked at Sophie. Then at the radio. Then at the dark sky beyond the hangar doors. He made a choice. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "And you're not going to like it." Sophie stirred on the bench, rubbing her eyes. She sat up slowly, blinking against the fluorescent lights of the hangar. Her father was pacing near the workbench, radio pressed to his ear, his expression tight in a way she'd only seen a few times before. It was the look he got when something was very wrong. "Dad?" she said quietly. Brian turned, and for a moment his face softened. He walked over and knelt beside her. "Hey, kiddo. I need you to listen carefully, okay?" Sophie nodded, suddenly very awake. "I have to go help someone. But I need you to stay here with Miss Carolyn in the office. She's going to keep you safe until I get back." "Help who?" "The lady. The one you said looked sad." Sophie's eyes widened. "The one on the plane?" "Yeah. What's wrong with her?" Brian hesitated. He'd never lied to his daughter, even when the truth was hard. He'd always found a way to make it honest, but simple. "Some bad people are on her plane, and she needs help." Sophie's small hand reached out and gripped his sleeve. "Are you going to be okay?" That question, the one that always broke him a little. He cupped her cheek gently. "I'll be careful, but I need you to be brave, just like we practiced. Remember?" She nodded. "Stay small. Stay quiet. Stay safe. That's my girl." He kissed her forehead and stood. Across the hangar, Carolyn appeared from the office, a kind woman in her 50s who ran dispatch and had been sneaking Sophie cookies for the last 2 years. "I've got her, Brian," Carolyn said, though her face betrayed her worry. "You sure about this?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." He grabbed his tool bag and slung it over his shoulder. Then he paused and looked at Sophie one more time. "Dad," she called out. He turned. "The lady is going to be okay now, right?" He wanted to say yes, Wanted to promise her the way fathers are supposed to promise their daughters that everything would be fine. Instead, he said, "I'm going to try." And that was enough for Sophie. She nodded, trusting him the way only someone who loves you completely can. Brian walked out into the cold night air, his boots crunching on the wet pavement. Davis was waiting near a service truck, engine running, face pale. "You're insane," Davis said. "You know that, right?" "Probably. The FAA is saying do nothing. Wait for protocol. Let the feds handle it." Brian opened the truck door. "How long does protocol take?" "Hours. Maybe longer." "She doesn't have hours." Davis ran a hand through his hair. "Tate, even if you get to the auxiliary airfield before they do, even if you somehow get on that plane, you're one guy. They've got 8 armed men." Brian looked at him. His voice was calm, unnervingly calm. "I've been one guy before." Davis stared at him. Then something clicked. "Wait, you're not just some mechanic, are you?" Brian didn't answer. He just started the truck. "Where were you before this?" Davis pressed. "Before the grease, and the wrenches, and the overnight shifts." Brian's hands tightened on the wheel. Somewhere loud. He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Davis saw it then, the stillness in Brian's eyes that wasn't peace. It was control. The kind of control that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. "The plane's heading southwest," Davis said after a beat. "Based on current trajectory, they'll land at a small airstrip called Ridgeline Field. It's private, unmonitored, perfect for something like this." "How far?" 40 minutes by road, but there'll be wheels, down in 30. "Then I'd better drive fast." Brian pulled out of the hangar, tires squealing as he shot onto the access road. The night swallowed him, and the only lights were the distant glow of the runway behind him and the stars above. As he drove, his mind shifted. Not into panic, into preparation. He'd left the Navy years ago, but the training never left him. The scenarios, the contingencies, the cold mathematics of survival. 8 hostiles, 1 asset to protect. Confined space, high altitude, no backup. It wasn't ideal, but he'd worked with worse. The road stretched ahead, winding through hills and darkness. Brian's phone buzzed. A text from Carolyn. "Sophie's asleep. I've got her. Be safe." He didn't reply, just kept driving. Inside the Gulfstream, Zoe sat rigid in her seat. The lead hijacker, who'd introduced himself only as Mr. Cade, stood near the cockpit door, arms crossed. The others were positioned throughout the cabin. 2 near the exits, 2 by the galley, 1 standing directly behind her. She'd stopped asking questions, stopped trying to reason. These weren't amateurs. They moved with precision, communicated with glances. No wasted words. No hesitation. Professional. "We'll be landing in 15 minutes, Cade said. "I suggest you prepare yourself mentally for what comes next." "And what's that?" Zoe asked, voice steady despite the adrenaline burning through her veins. "A transaction. You give us access, we disappear. You go home. Everyone wins. Except the people, whose data you'll steal, the markets you'll crash, the lives you'll ruin." Cade smiled thinly. "Morality is expensive, Miss Lewis. You of all people should know that." Persidas. "Miss Lewis, you of all people should know that." She wanted to spit at him, wanted to scream, but she knew better. She'd built a company from nothing, survived hostile takeovers, boardroom betrayals, and sabotage. She knew how to wait, how to watch, how to look for the opening. And right now, there wasn't one. But maybe there would be. One of the hijackers near the rear of the cabin suddenly stiffened. He pressed a finger to his earpiece and frowned. "Cade," he said quietly, "we've got a problem." Cade turned. "What kind of problem?" "Fuel pressure's dropping. Not critical yet, but it's falling faster than it should." Cade's jaw tightened. "Mechanical failure?" "Could be. Or tampering." Zoe's heart skipped. Tampering. Could someone have sabotaged the plane before takeoff? Then she remembered. The maintenance worker. The quiet man with the daughter. The one who'd been under the wing for nearly an hour. Had he seen something? Done something? Cade moved toward the cockpit. Tell the pilot to adjust. We land in 12 minutes, no matter what. But as the plane began its descent, a faint metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. Not loud, but unmistakable. Something was wrong. And somewhere below, racing through the desert night toward an airstrip that wasn't on any official map, Brian Tate pressed the accelerator harder. He wasn't going to make it in time, but he was going to try, because a little girl with crooked pigtails had asked him if the sad lady would be okay. And he'd said he'd try. That was a promise he intended to keep. The Gulfstream's landing gear extended with a hydraulic groan that rattled through the cabin. Zoe felt the shift in air pressure as the plane descended, her ears popping as the altitude dropped rapidly. Through the window, she could see nothing but darkness punctuated by a narrow strip of runway lights appearing like a slash of amber in the void. Ridgeline Field. Isolated, unmonitored. The perfect place to vanish. Cade stood near the cockpit, speaking into a satellite phone. His voice was low, clipped, professional. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't meant for her ears. The other hijackers maintained their positions, weapons now visible. Compact submachine guns. Not for show, for use. Zoe's wrist device felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She'd designed the Arcadia Vault security herself. Biometric authentication, triple encrypted access keys, time-delayed authorization protocols. It was supposed to be impenetrable. But every system had a weakness, and hers was strapped to her wrist. The plane touched down hard, tires screeching against asphalt. The reverse thrusters roared, and the aircraft shuddered as it slowed. Zoe gripped the armrests, not from fear of the landing, but from what came next. Cade ended his call and turned to her. We'll be met by a vehicle. You'll be escorted to a secure location where the transfer will take place. If you cooperate, you'll be released within 6 hours. If you don't, well, let's not explore that option. Zoe said nothing. She was calculating. 6 hours was a lifetime in the tech world. Long enough for her security team to notice her silence. Long enough for emergency protocols to activate. Long enough for someone to realize she was missing. But also long enough for these men to extract what they needed and disappear. The plane rolled to a stop near a darkened hangar. The engines powered down, and the cabin fell into an eerie quiet. One of the hijackers moved to the door and began the unlocking sequence. That's when the lights went out. Not just in the cabin. Everywhere. The runway lights, the hangar, even the faint glow from the cockpit instruments. Complete darkness. What the hell? Cade barked. One of his men clicked on a tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating confused faces. Power's out. Could be a grid failure. Or sabotage. Another voice added. Cade's jaw tightened. Secure the asset. 2 men outside. Check the perimeter. 2 hijackers moved toward the door. The first. One stepped out onto the airstairs, flashlight sweeping the tarmac. The second followed. Then came a sound. Soft, metallic, like something rolling across pavement. What was that? The first man said. The second one aimed his flashlight toward the noise. A small canister rolled to a stop near the landing gear. Is that? The canister hissed. White smoke erupted in a thick cloud, swallowing the airstairs, the men, and the immediate area around the plane. Gas! Get back inside, Cade shouted. But it was too late. The 2 men stumbled, coughing, disoriented. One dropped his weapon, the other fired blindly into the smoke, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating chaos. Then silence. Inside the cabin, Cade grabbed Zoe by the arm and yanked her toward the rear. Move. Now. But before they could reach the galley, a sound came from below. A mechanical clunk, then another. Someone was opening the cargo hatch. We've got a breach. one of the hijackers said. Weapon trained on the floor. The hatch opened. Smoke drifted up through the gap, and then a figure emerged. Brian Tate climbed into the cabin with the calm precision of someone who'd done this before. He wore a black jacket over his maintenance uniform, a respirator mask covering his nose and mouth, and carried nothing but a heavy-duty flashlight and a canvas tool bag. He looked at the hijackers, then at Zoe. "Evening," he said. Voice muffled, but steady. One of the men raised his weapon. "Don't move." Brian didn't. He just stood there, hands visible, non-threatening. Cade stepped forward, keeping Zoe in front of him like a shield. "Who the hell are you?" Brian pulled down his respirator. "Maintenance crew. Got a call about a fuel pressure issue. Thought I'd check it out." "You're lying." Brian shrugged. "Maybe, but your plane's leaking hydraulic fluid all over the tarmac. Thought you'd want to know before you try to take off again." Cade's eyes narrowed. "You cut the power." "Did I? And the smoke?" Brian glanced toward the open door. "Old mechanic trick. Mineral oil and dry ice. Looks scary. Harmless." One of the hijackers moved closer, weapon aimed at Brian's chest. "Get on the ground. Now." Brian complied, slowly lowering himself to his knees, hands behind his head. But as he did, his eyes met Zoe's. And in that brief glance, she saw something. Not fear, not recklessness, just quiet certainty. He had a plan. Cade gestured to two of his men. "Zip tie him. We'll deal with him after the transfer." One of the hijackers approached, pulling plastic restraints from his belt. He grabbed Brian's wrist and began to secure it. That's when Brian moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. It was economical. He twisted his wrist, redirecting the hijacker's grip, and in the same motion drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus. The hijacker gasped, air exploding from his lungs. Brian grabbed the weapon as it fell, reversed it, and slammed the stock into the second man's knee. The man collapsed with a howl. Brian swept the weapon across the cabin, not firing, just creating distance. Everyone stays calm. Nobody gets hurt. Cade yanked Zoe closer, a small pistol now pressed to her temple. "Drop it. Now. Or she dies." Brian froze. His eyes flicked to Zoe, then back to Cade. "You're not going to kill her," Brian said evenly. "She's worth more alive. Don't test me." Brian slowly lowered the weapon. But he didn't drop it. "Not yet. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let her go. You're going to walk off this plane. And you're going to disappear before the federal response team gets here." Cade laughed. "What federal team?" Brian tilted his head. "The one that's been tracking this aircraft since it deviated from its flight path. The one that's currently en route with enough firepower to turn this airstrip into a parking lot." Cade's confidence flickered. Just for a second. But it was enough. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" In the distance, barely audible, came the faint thrum of Goddarass. Rotor blades, helicopters, multiple. Cade's face went pale. He looked at his remaining men. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. "This isn't over," Cade hissed. Brian's voice was cold. "Yeah, it is." Cade shoved Zoe forward. She stumbled, and Brian caught her, steadying her with one arm while keeping the weapon trained on the hijackers with the other. "Go," Brian said to Cade. "Before I change my mind." Cade and his men retreated toward the rear exit. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness and smoke. Brian waited until the sound of their footsteps faded. Then he lowered the weapon and turned to Zoe. "You okay?" She stared at him, breathless, heart pounding. "Who are you?" He gave a faint smile. "Just a mechanic." "Mechanics don't move like that." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his tool bag and pulled out a small first aid kit. "You're bleeding." Zoe touched her temple. Her fingers came away red. She hadn't even felt it. Brian guided her to a seat and gently cleaned the cut. His hands were steady, practiced. "You'll need stitches," But this'll hold for now. She watched him work, her mind still spinning. The helicopters. Are they real? Brian glanced up. No. What? I played a sound file through a portable speaker. Old PSYOPs trick. Make the enemy think reinforcements are coming, and they'll retreat on their own. Zoe's mouth fell open. You tricked them. I gave them a reason to leave without bloodshed. But they'll realize. By the time they do, the real authorities will be here. I made sure of that before I left. Zoe sat back, overwhelmed. Why did you come? Brian secured the bandage and met her eyes. My daughter asked me if you'd be okay. Your daughter? Sophie. She was at the terminal when you boarded. She said you looked sad. Zoe's throat tightened. And you risked your life because your daughter asked you to help me? Brian stood and slung his bag over his shoulder. She believes people should help each other. I'm trying to teach her that's still possible. For the first time in months, Zoe felt something other than fear or exhaustion. She felt hope. Outside, the real sound of sirens began to rise in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered on the horizon. Brian moved toward the cargo hatch. You should get your wrist checked. That device is probably broadcasting your location. If Cade's smart, he's already tracking it. Zoe looked down at the bracelet. It's biometrically locked. He can't access it without me. Then keep it close, and don't trust anyone until you know who sold you out. Wait, she called as he started to descend. I don't even know your name. He paused and looked back. Brian Tate. Brian, I owe you my life. He shook his head. You don't owe me anything, just pay it forward. And with that, he disappeared into the smoke. The federal agents arrived in force. SUVs with tinted windows, tactical teams in full gear, and a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Special Agent Lillian Cross from the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division. She was sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and clearly exhausted from being pulled into a crisis at 2 in the morning. Zoe sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over her shoulders, while a paramedic finished cleaning the cut on her temple. Around her, the airstrip had transformed into a command center. Floodlights illuminated the tarmac. Crime scene tape cordoned off the Gulf Stream. Investigators combed through the cabin and cargo hold, documenting everything. Agent Cross approached with a tablet in hand. Miss Lewis, I need to ask you some questions. Zoe nodded, still numb from the adrenaline crash. Can you walk me through what happened? Start from when the hijackers boarded. Zoe recounted the events, her voice steady but hollow. The 8 men, the weapons, the demand for her access codes, the landing at Ridgeline, and then Brian Tate appearing from the cargo hold like a ghost. Cross's pen paused mid-note. Brian Tate, the maintenance worker. Yes. Where is he now? I don't know. He left before you arrived. Cross exchanged a glance with another agent. We'll need to speak with him. Do you have contact information? No. But he works at Silver Point Executive Terminal. Night shift. Cross made a note. Then she leaned in slightly. Miss Lewis, we've been monitoring unusual activity around your company for the last 3 months. Financial irregularities, encrypted communications, shell accounts tied to offshore entities. This hijacking wasn't random. It was coordinated. Zoe's stomach turned. I know. The lead hijacker mentioned Victor Harlan. Cross's expression darkened. Victor Harlan. Your original investor. Former investor. I froze his shares 6 months ago after he tried to force a sale to a foreign hedge fund. It would have violated federal securities law. And you think he orchestrated this as retaliation? I don't know. But someone close to me gave them inside information. Flight schedules, security protocols. They knew everything. Cross handed her the tablet. On the screen was a photo of a man in his late 50s, silver hair, tailored suit, smiling for the camera at a charity gala. Victor Harlan. We've been building a case against him for months. Cross said. Money laundering, corporate espionage, ties to organized crime, but we've never had enough to move. Until now. Zoe stared at the photo. Victor had been a mentor once. He'd believed in her when no one else did. Funded her through 3 failed prototypes. Introduced her to investors who made Arcadia possible. And now he'd tried to have her kidnapped. There's something else, Cross continued. We found encrypted files on the plane's communication system. Someone was transmitting data from inside your company to an external server. Real-time updates on your location, security details, access protocols. Who? We're working on that. But whoever it was had high-level clearance. Zoe's mind raced through her executive team, her CFO, her head of security, her assistant, people she trusted, people she'd worked with for years. I want full access to the investigation, Zoe said. Cross shook her head. This is a federal case now. You're a witness, not an investigator. It's my company, my data, my life. And that's exactly why you need to step back. If you interfere, you could compromise the entire case. Zoe wanted to argue, wanted to demand control, but she was too tired, too shaken. Fine, she said quietly. But I want updates. Daily. Cross nodded. We'll do what we can. As the agent walked away, Zoe pulled out her phone. It had been off since the hijacking. She powered it on, and immediately it exploded with notifications. Missed calls, texts, emails. One message stood out. From an unknown number. You asked who I was. I'm someone who remembers when you built something because it mattered, not because it made money. Don't let them take that from you. Stay safe. BT. BT. Brian Tate. Zoe stared at the message. How did he get her number? And more importantly, how did he know exactly what she needed to hear? Hours later, after the interviews and the evidence collection and the endless procedural questions, Zoe was finally allowed to leave. A company car drove her back to Silver Point, where a private security team was waiting. But she didn't go to the executive lounge. Instead, she walked across the tarmac toward the maintenance hangar. The night shift was nearly over. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Inside the hangar, she found Brian at his workbench, tools spread out, grease-stained rag in hand. Sophie was asleep on a bench nearby, curled under a blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Brian looked up as Zoe approached. He didn't seem surprised. Figured you'd come by, he said. You left before I could thank you properly. He shrugged. Didn't need thanks. Just needed to make sure you got home safe. Zoe stepped closer. Agent Cross wants to talk to you. She has questions. I'm sure she does. Who are you? Brian. And don't tell me you're just a mechanic. He set down his wrench and wiped his hands. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, I used to be a combat engineer. Navy. Spent 14 years in places most people can't pronounce. I built things. Cleared things. Kept people alive. And now? Now I fix planes and raise my daughter. That's not the whole story. Brian looked toward Sophie, then back at Zoe. I left the service after my wife died. Came home to find my daughter hadn't spoken in a year. She was waiting for someone to walk through the door who was never coming back. Zoe's chest tightened. I realized I'd been chasing the wrong things, Brian continued. Medals, missions, validation. But none of it mattered when the person I loved most needed me, and I wasn't there. So you walked away. I chose differently. Zoe understood. She'd spent her entire adult life building an empire, proving herself, climbing higher, and somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten why she started. Victor Harlan, she said quietly. He used to be someone I trusted. People change, or maybe they just stop hiding who they always were. How do you move forward after that? After someone you believed in tries to destroy you? Brian met her eyes. You stop carrying their choices. You only carry your own. The simplicity of it hit her harder than any corporate strategy ever had. A voice called from the hangar entrance. Agent Cross, flanked by 2 other agents. "Mr. Tate, we need a statement." Brian nodded. "Give me a minute." He turned to Zoe. "You're going to be okay. You're stronger than you think." "How do you know?" He smiled faintly. "Because you didn't break up there. And you're still standing now." As Cross approached, Zoe stepped back. But before she left, she said, "Brian, if you ever need anything at all, you call me." He didn't answer, just gave a single nod. And as Zoe walked back across the tarmac, the sun breaking over the horizon, she realized something. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The investigation moved fast. Within 48 hours, federal agents had traced the encrypted communications back to a server farm in Eastern Europe. Financial records showed wire transfers from shell corporations linked to Victor Harlan, and security footage from Silver Point revealed something damning. One of Zoe's own executives had been feeding information to the hijackers. Ethan Voss, her chief technology officer, the man who'd helped her build Arcadia's infrastructure from the ground up. Zoe sat in the conference room of the FBI field office, staring at the video on the screen. Ethan, standing in a parking garage, handing a manila envelope to a man later identified as Cade. "We arrested him this morning," Agent Cross said. "He's cooperating. Says Harlan promised him $10 million and a position in a new company after Arcadia collapsed." Zoe felt nauseous. "Ethan's been with me for 8 years. Greed doesn't care about loyalty." "What about Harlan?" Cross leaned back in her chair. "He's disappeared. Left the country 3 days before the hijacking. We've got warrants, but he's in a country with no extradition treaty. So he just gets away with it? For now. But we'll keep building the case. Eventually, he'll make a mistake." Zoe stood, pacing. "This isn't enough. He tried to have me killed. He compromised national security. And you're telling me he just walks?" "I'm telling you the system takes time." "I don't have time." Zoe's voice cracked. "Every day he's out there. He's a threat. To me. To my company. To everyone who trusted me." Cross's expression softened. "I understand your frustration. But vigilante justice isn't the answer." Zoe wanted to scream. Wanted to flip the table. But instead, she just nodded and left. Outside the building, she found Brian leaning against a truck, arms crossed. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, reading a book. "You followed me?" Zoe asked. "Wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm not." Brian didn't offer platitudes, didn't tell her it would all work out. He just stood there, present. "Harlan's gone," Zoe said bitterly. "Fled the country. And the man who betrayed me is sitting in a cell making deals while I'm left to pick up the pieces." "Sounds about right." She looked at him sharply. "That doesn't bother you. It bothers me. But getting angry doesn't change it." "Then what does?" Brian pushed off the truck. "You keep building. You keep moving forward. And you make sure the thing you're building is worth protecting." Zoe shook her head. "I don't even know if Arcadia is worth saving anymore. Maybe I should just sell it, walk away, start over." "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want." Brian studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." He drove her to a community center on the outskirts of town. The building was old, paint peeling, windows covered with bars. But inside, it was alive. A group of teenagers sat in a computer lab, coding on refurbished laptops. An instructor walked between them, offering guidance. On the wall was a banner that read, "Arcadia Futures Program." Zoe froze. "I funded this 2 years ago," Brian said. "You donated 50 laptops and paid for a coding instructor for kids who couldn't afford tech programs." She'd forgotten. It had been a small initiative. A tax write-off, really. But, standing here now, Watching these young people learn, create, build, she remembered why she'd started Arcadia in the first place. One of the teenagers looked up and recognized her. His eyes went wide. "Wait, are you Zoe Lewis?" She nodded. The kid stood, excited. "You're, like, the reason I'm here. I built my first app using one of these laptops, got a scholarship to MIT because of it." Zoe's throat tightened. "You did that. Not me." "Yeah, but you gave me the chance." After they left, Zoe sat in the truck, silent. Brian didn't push, just let her process. Finally, she said, "I've been so focused on the empire, I forgot about the people. Easy to do when you're fighting to survive. But I shouldn't have to choose between survival and purpose." Brian glanced at her. "Then don't build something that does both." She looked at him. "You make it sound simple." "It's not, but it's possible." That night, Zoe returned to her office for the first time since the hijacking. The building was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. For hours, she worked. Not on quarterly projections or investor reports. On something else. A new initiative. A foundation. One that would take Arcadia's resources and channel them into communities that needed it most. Education, technology access, support for single parents trying to build better lives for their families. She named it the Futures Project, and the first person she wanted to consult was Brian. She called him. He answered on the second ring. "It's late," he said. "I know, but I need your advice." "On what?" "On how to build something that actually matters." There was a pause. Then Brian said, "I'll come by tomorrow." The next morning, he arrived at her office with Sophie. The little girl stared wide-eyed at the glass walls and the view of the city below. "Whoa," Sophie whispered. Zoe smiled. "Pretty cool, right?" Sophie nodded. Then she looked at Zoe seriously. "Are you okay now?" Dad said. "Some bad people tried to hurt you." Zoe knelt down. "I'm okay. Your dad made sure of that." Sophie beamed. "He's really good at helping people." I noticed. Brian and Zoe spent the morning going over her plans. He asked hard questions, challenged her assumptions, made sure the foundation wasn't just another corporate PR move. "You have to mean it," he said, "or it'll just be another logo on a website." "I mean it. Then you'll need people you trust. People who won't sell you out the first time things get hard." "Where do I find those people?" Brian looked at her. "You start by being that person yourself." Over the next few weeks, Zoe rebuilt. Not just her company, but her life. She restructured her executive team, hired independent auditors, implemented new security protocols, and launched the Futures Project with a quiet announcement that focused on impact, not ego. Brian stayed close, not as an employee, not as a bodyguard, just as someone who showed up when she needed him. And, slowly, something shifted between them. Not just respect, not just gratitude, something deeper. One evening, as they stood on the roof of Arcadia's headquarters watching the sunset, Zoe said, "I don't know how to thank you." Brian shook his head. "You don't need to." "I do. You saved my life. You helped me remember why I started this. You didn't ask for anything in return." "That's because I don't want anything." She looked at him. "What if I want to give you something anyway?" He met her eyes. "Like what?" "A chance to build something together. Not a company, just something real." Brian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been alone for a long time. Not sure I remember how to be anything else." "Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together." He smiled. A real smile. One that reached his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "maybe we can." And as the city lights flickered to life below them, two people who'd been fighting alone realized they didn't have to anymore. 3 weeks after the hijacking, Zoe received a phone call that changed everything. It was Agent Cross, her voice tight with urgency. "We found him. Victor Harlan. He made a mistake." Zoe sat up in her office chair. "Where?" "Montreal. He used a credit card tied to an old alias. Canadian authorities have him in custody, but there's a problem. His lawyers are arguing he's a political refugee fleeing corporate persecution. They're fighting extradition. How long do we have?" 72 hours before the hearing. If the judge rules in his favor, he walks. We need you to testify. Your statement could be the difference between justice and him disappearing forever." Zoe's hands trembled. The thought of facing Victor, of sitting across from the man who'd tried to destroy her, made her stomach turn. But she knew what she had to do. "I'll be there." She hung up and stared out the window. The city stretched below her, indifferent to her turmoil. She picked up her phone and called Brian. "I need to go to Montreal," she said when he answered. "Victor's been found." There was a pause. "You want company?" "I don't want to pull you away from Sophie. Carolyn can watch her for a few days. And you shouldn't do this alone." Zoe closed her eyes, grateful. "Thank you." They flew commercial this time. First class, but still surrounded by other passengers. Brian sat beside her, reading a magazine while she reviewed her testimony notes. Sophie had insisted on packing Zoe a good luck charm, a small origami crane she'd folded herself. "She's worried about you," Brian had said when he handed it over. Now, as the plane descended into Montreal, Zoe clutched the paper crane in her palm. The extradition hearing took place in a gray government building that smelled like old coffee and bureaucracy. Victor Harlan sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression calm. He looked like a man attending a business meeting, not facing criminal charges. When his eyes met Zoe's, he smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically, just a small, knowing smile that said he still believed he'd win. Zoe took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted everything. The hijacking, the threats, the betrayal, the 8 armed men who'd held her at gunpoint, while Victor's associate demanded access to systems that could crash global markets. Victor's lawyer objected repeatedly. Hearsay. Speculation. No direct evidence linking Mr. Harlan to these alleged events. But Agent Cross had done her homework. She presented financial records, encrypted communications, testimony from Ethan Voss, who detailed exactly how Victor had orchestrated everything. The evidence was damning. During a break, Zoe stepped outside for air. Brian was waiting in the hallway. "You're doing great," he said. "I feel like I'm going to be sick." "That means you're human." She leaned against the wall. "He's sitting in there like none of this matters. Like he's already won." "He hasn't." "How do you know?" Brian looked at her. "Because you're still standing. And he's the one in handcuffs." When court resumed, Victor's lawyer made his final argument. He painted Victor as a visionary investor betrayed by an ungrateful protege. A man forced to take desperate measures to protect his life's work. Then it was the prosecution's turn. They didn't just present evidence, they presented impact. Testimonies from employees who'd lost their jobs when Ethan's sabotage caused system failures. Security footage of families threatened by Victor's associates. And Zoe's own words. Describing the moment, she'd thought she would die. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents in silence. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Harlan, the evidence against you is substantial and credible. Your actions endangered lives, violated international law, and demonstrated a pattern of criminal behavior spanning years. Extradition is granted. You will be returned to the United States to face trial." Victor's calm facade cracked. Just for a moment, his jaw tightened and his hands clenched on the table. Zoe felt something release in her chest. Not joy, not relief, just closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. But Zoe didn't stop to answer. She just walked, Brian beside her, until they reached a quiet park a few blocks away. She sat on a bench and finally let herself breathe. "It's over," she said. Brian sat beside her. "The legal part is. The rest takes longer." "How long did it take you? After you left the Navy?" He thought about it. "I'm still working on it." She looked at him. "Does it get easier?" "No, but you get stronger." They sat in silence, watching people pass. Joggers, couples holding hands, a man walking a dog, the world moving forward, indifferent to courtrooms and betrayals and second chances. "Brian," Zoe said quietly, "why did you really come with me?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because when my wife died, I faced everything alone, and I don't think anyone should have to do that." She reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away, and sitting there, in a park thousands of miles from home, Zoe realized something. She'd spent her entire life building walls to protect herself. But maybe what she really needed wasn't walls. Maybe she just needed someone willing to stand beside her when they came down. The trial lasted 3 months. Victor Harlan was convicted on 14 counts, including conspiracy, extortion, and endangerment. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. But the night before sentencing, Zoe received a letter. It was handwritten, delivered through Victor's attorney. She opened it in her hotel room, hands shaking. The letter was short. "Zoe, I know you won't believe this, but I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to save what we built together. You changed. You stopped listening. You froze me out of decisions that were as much mine as yours. I lost everything because of you. And yes, I made choices I regret. But so did you. We both built this cage. Don't pretend you're innocent. Victor." Zoe read it 3 times. Each time, her anger grew, then subsided, then grew again. Brian found her sitting on the floor, the letter crumpled beside her. "You okay?" he asked. "He's blaming me. After everything, he still thinks he's the victim." Brian picked up the letter and read it. Then he set it down. "He's not entirely wrong." Zoe looked at him sharply. "Excuse me? I'm not saying what he did was right. It wasn't. But people don't become villains overnight. Something broke between you two long before the hijacking. So I'm supposed to feel sorry for him? No, but maybe you need to ask yourself what you could have done differently. Not to excuse him, just to understand how it got this bad." Zoe stood, pacing. "I froze his shares because he was breaking the law. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice in how you did it. Did you talk to him first? Did you try to find another way?" She stopped. The truth was, she hadn't. She'd been so focused on protecting Arcadia, on proving she was in control, that she'd made the decision unilaterally. She'd told herself it was leadership. But maybe it was just fear. "I was scared," she admitted. "Scared he'd manipulate me. Scared I'd lose everything I'd built. And he was probably scared too. Scared of losing relevance. Scared of being pushed out. That doesn't justify what he did. No. But it explains it." Zoe sat down, exhausted. "So what am I supposed to do? Forgive him?" Brian shook his head. "Forgiveness is complicated. But you can choose not to carry his anger. You can choose to learn from it and build something better." She looked at the letter again. "How did you do it? After your wife died, and you were blamed for not being there. How did you move forward?" Brian's voice was quiet. "I stopped asking why it happened and started asking what I was going to do with what was left. I couldn't bring her back, couldn't change the past, but I could choose how I raised our daughter. I could choose to be present even when it hurt." Zoe nodded slowly. "Victor's going to prison. Ethan's cooperating for a reduced sentence. And I'm left running a company that's been torn apart. Part of me wants to burn it all down and start over." "Do you?" She thought about it. About the teenagers in the Chan coding program. About the employees who'd stayed loyal. About the innovations still waiting to be built. "No," she said. "I want to rebuild it. But differently this time. With people I trust. With purpose beyond profit. Brian smiled. Then that's what you do. Later that week, Zoe stood in front of Arcadia's board of directors. She'd restructured the company, brought in independent oversight, and implemented transparency measures that made some investors uncomfortable. Some of you won't like these changes, she said. Some of you will leave, but Arcadia isn't just a business anymore. It's a responsibility. To our employees, to our community, to the future we're building. 3 board members resigned immediately, but the others stayed. And slowly, the company began to heal. One evening, as Zoe was locking up her office, she found Brian waiting outside. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Always." They walked through the empty building, past cubicles and conference rooms, and the innovation lab where new ideas were born. "Do you ever regret it?" Zoe asked. "Walking away from the Navy? From everything you built?" Brian considered. "I regret the things I missed. The moments with my wife I can't get back. But I don't regret choosing my daughter. And I don't regret choosing a quieter life. Even when it's harder. Especially then." They reached the elevator. As the doors opened, Zoe turned to him. "I want to do something. Something that matters. Not just for my company, but for people like you. Veterans trying to rebuild. Single parents fighting to survive. People who've been forgotten." "What did you have in mind?" She smiled. "I'll show you." 6 months later, Zoe stood in front of a renovated warehouse on the edge of town. The building had once been abandoned, windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti. Now it gleamed with fresh paint, solar panels on the roof, and a sign above the entrance that read Arcadia Pathways Center. Inside were classrooms, computer labs, childcare facilities, and counseling offices. It was a place for people rebuilding their lives, veterans transitioning to civilian work, single parents learning new skills, young people who needed a second chance. Brian stood beside her, Sophie holding his hand. "You really did it," he said. Zoe nodded. "We did it." The center had been Brian's idea. He'd connected her with veterans organizations, community leaders, and people who understood what rebuilding actually required. And together, they'd created something that didn't just offer help, it offered dignity. Sophie tugged on Zoe's sleeve. "Can I see the art room?" Zoe smiled. "Of course." She led Sophie inside, past the registration desk where volunteers greeted visitors, past the workshop where someone was teaching basic carpentry, to a bright room filled with easels, paint, and canvas. Sophie's eyes went wide. "This is amazing. It's for kids like you," Zoe said. "Kids who need a place to create. While there, parents are learning new things. Can I paint something? Anytime you want." As Sophie ran to grab supplies, Brian came up beside Zoe. "She's going to spend every afternoon here." "Good. That's what it's for." They watched Sophie start painting, her tongue poking out in concentration, completely absorbed. "You know," Brian said quietly, 6 months ago, I never thought I'd be standing here. I was just trying to get through each day, make enough money, keep Sophie safe. And now," he looked at Zoe, "now I'm thinking about tomorrow, about what we're building, about what's possible." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "Me too." Over the following weeks, the center flourished. More people came, more programs launched, and Zoe found herself spending less time in her corporate office and more time here, where the impact was immediate and real. One afternoon, she was working with a group of veterans on resume building when Brian appeared in the doorway. He gestured for her to step outside. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to show you something." He led her to a small garden area behind the building. Someone had planted flowers, installed benches, and created a peaceful space away from the noise. "The veterans built this," Brian said. "They wanted a place to decompress, somewhere quiet." Zoe looked around, moved. "It's beautiful. They want to name it after you." "What?" "No. I didn't do anything. You gave them the space, the tools, the chance. She shook her head. Name it after your wife. She's the reason you're here. The reason Sophie's here. The reason you understand what these people need. Brian's eyes glistened. You'd do that? It's the right thing. He pulled her into a hug. Not romantic, just grateful. And Zoe realized something. This was what she'd been searching for. Not power, not validation, just connection. That evening, as the center closed, Zoe and Brian sat on one of the garden benches. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I've been thinking, Zoe said, about what comes next. For me. For us. Brian looked at her. Us. I care about you, Brian. And Sophie. You've become important to me. More than important. He was quiet for a moment. I care about you too, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the guy who's going to show up at galas or board meetings. I'm not going to be comfortable in that world. I don't need you to be. I just need you to be you. And Sophie? She comes first, always. I wouldn't want it any other way. He reached over and took her hand. Then yeah, us. Let's figure it out. She leaned her head on his shoulder. And they sat like that until the stars came out. Two people who'd been broken, finding wholeness in each other. 1 year after the hijacking, Arcadia Pathways Center held its anniversary celebration. The parking lot was full. Community members, veterans, families, and local officials gathered under a tent strung with lights. Zoe stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. Brian sat in the front row with Sophie, who wore her best dress and kept waving. A year ago, Zoe began, I thought I'd lost everything. My company was compromised. My trust was shattered. I didn't know who I was anymore. She paused, collecting herself. But I learned something. You don't find yourself in success. You find yourself in what you do when everything falls apart. The crowd was silent, listening. This center exists because of people who refused to give up. Veterans who built gardens. Single parents who showed up every day. A man who risked everything to save someone he didn't even know. She looked at Brian. He gave a small nod. We named this place Pathways because everyone here is on a journey. And we want to walk alongside you. Not ahead of you. Not behind you. Beside you. Applause erupted. Zoe stepped down, and Sophie ran up to hug her. You did great, Sophie said. Thanks, sweetheart. Later, as the celebration continued, Zoe found Brian near the garden. He was planting a small tree, a maple sapling, that would grow with the center. Need help? She asked. Always. They worked together, packing soil around the roots, making sure it was secure. When they finished, Sophie placed a handmade sign beside it. Rachel's Garden, it read. Named after Brian's late wife. Brian stared at it, emotions playing across his face. She would have loved this. I wish I could have met her, Zoe said. She would have liked you. Would have told me I was an idiot if I didn't see what was right in front of me. Zoe smiled. Smart woman. As the sun set, the three of them stood together, watching people laugh and connect and build community. Dad? Sophie said. Yeah, kiddo? Are we going to stay here, in this city? Brian glanced at Zoe. I think so. Why? Because I like it here, and I like that Zoe's part of our family now. Zoe's breath caught. She looked at Brian, uncertain. He smiled and pulled Sophie close. Yeah, me too. Sophie beamed, then ran off to play with other children. Brian turned to Zoe. So, family. That's a big word. Too big? No. Just right. He kissed her. Not desperately, not dramatically, just softly, like a promise. And as the stars appeared above the garden, Zoe realized something. She'd spent her whole life climbing, achieving, proving. But this, standing here with a man who saw her completely, and a young girl who trusted her, This was the summit. Not power, not wealth, just love and purpose, and the quiet knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Months turned into years. The center expanded. Arcadia Tech thrived under new leadership that valued ethics as much as profits. And Zoe, Brian, and Sophie built a life together. Not perfect, but real. And on quiet evenings, when Sophie was asleep and the world was still, Zoe would stand on the balcony of the home they now shared and think about that night on the plane. About 8 armed men who'd thought they could take everything. About a maintenance worker who'd proved them wrong. About a little girl who'd asked if the sad lady would be okay. And she'd smile, because the answer was yes. Not because someone saved her, but because she'd learned to save herself. And somewhere in that journey, she'd found something better than safety. She'd found home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.